Welcome, Joe.
Hey now.
Yeah, great to have you. Looking forward to diving into our conversation today to talk about you and how you've grown your company Shift, lessons learned, all that good stuff. But why don't we just start off and have you share what does Shift do?
So we help leaders thrive through exponential change. That's the fancy term. But for the last 20, actually, we celebrated our 23rd anniversary or service anniversary, whatever you want to call it, birthday,
Congratulations.
November 2nd,
Wow.
which also marks half my life. I had to think about this. So I've been doing this since I was 23 years old inside of this business. So it's been a long and crazy journey. But yeah, we think of us as a small McKinsey that cares is the way that I frame the sort of model. So there you
go. I love that last part, that cares. Lots of good thoughts running through my mind when you say that. If you give people a kind of a sense of the size of the company today, how many people, how many clients and projects do you typically work on in a given year? Revenue, just anything that you're able to share.
Yeah. Why don't I give you just a little thumbnail how this whole thing got started for a second. So I was an entrepreneur in the late 90s. I was coming out of college and got a job with Anderson Consulting, thought I had made it. And one of the last things I was doing entrepreneurially landed me in the home of the former CEO of Chase Manhattan Bank in Maryland. And this guy basically got a hold of me for about 6 months after hearing some of my life story, which we don't necessarily need to get into today. It was like, you were the most unemployable person I've ever met. I was like, oh shit. And so this sort of tracks with, I mean, the background is I grew up in the inner city of Baltimore. I, kind of grew up where they shot the wire and was able to get to Hopkins, get there. And I'm like a quantum leap away from the world I came from. And he's like, you're about to make that next quantum leap, except this time, I don't necessarily see you as a corporate guy. So this, among lots of other things, my mom passed, which was a lot of death by the time I was 23. I ended up starting up this company with the idea of how do you bring a little more humanity to the workplace? The difference between me and, a lot of the guys that didn't make it out of my neighborhood was that my dad didn't lose his job. He didn't work for the big GM plant in Baltimore. He just happened to work for a small business that became big. And so I had this, front row seat to watching, my dad, who's like the GOAT of dads, who didn't have a good dad, didn't have a dad that was really around. He just showed up and he used to instill this idea that, he's like, I don't have to work. I get to work. And this is a guy working outside and the elements. So, that statement meant something. And so as a 23-year-old kid who didn't know anything, and by the way, I'm 46 and still don't know much, I would walk into some of these companies. And again, I had a lot of one of my companies went from 5 to 150 people, and I'm a sports guy. So it's just really based on rhythms and rituals and routines and, having a goal and a vision, and then aligning the team to sort of get to that place, just like you would as the football coach. Right. It was a lot of the things that I'd learned playing sports that I sort of brought to business. And then a lot of personal development. I kept noticing, I went through all of Tony Robbins stuff, all of these things when I was 21, 22, and 23, and just fell in love with the idea of learning and growing. I was like, why are people not doing this in the work? Why do people show up on Monday and hate their life? Why do people act like this is something they have to do? And, through the years, and I can give you more here in a second, I found myself at about 12 years into the business, working with a couple hundred companies. I put all of that into a book. It was called Grow Regardless. It did really well. Hit the New York Times, was the #1 book in the world for 3 days. I beat 50 Shades of Grey, believe it or not. And then the next couple companies that called us were big companies like Benjamin Moore and all these. They called them. I have no idea what to do to help you. I've never walked. I mean, I basically didn't take the job with Anderson to get away from big corporate America. And from 2012 to about 2020, we grew the team to, 40 some management consultants spread out across 6 different cities, more of your traditional, not time and material. We were actually billing based on retainer because that's all I ever knew. I didn't think about doing the time for money thing in the traditional sense. And I've done a lot of other things in terms of investing and starting other businesses around the consulting business. But if you'd asked me when I was 23, would I still be doing this at 23? I'd be like, I don't think so. Because look, if you're in this game, what you'll find very quickly is that you're only as good as your last meeting. And that's a tough business to be in unless you're doing staff augmentation or government contracting, or unless you've got some other version of a moat or a subscription business that will really lock you in. So yeah, I've built up a team. We're transitioning here a bit post-pandemic into a tech-enabled consultancy. We built a platform, bought a small company, and I'm, can give you more on that later. But yeah, it's been a journey of many different ins and outs. And my wife was like, "Hey, it's your 23rd anniversary today." She's like, "It's like been 6 companies since the last time you did all this." She's not lying. It's definitely been a lot of twists and turns, but I think it's an honorable position. It's a privilege to get a chance to be brought into someone else's company and to ask, to be asked to help and serve. And so that's really been the big purpose and the big why for me, which is like, it really, my dad not losing his job, my dad working for a company that could provide me a life in a very different way than where we came from, is a real big part of my why.
Take me back to the statement you just made about you're only as good as your last meeting. What does that mean to you? Where does that come from?
Well, my first couple of clients, one company went from 2 to 50 million in a few years. I was 23, 24 years old. And then we were fired. I was like, I don't get this. We just went from like here to there. There's a lot of acknowledgement that I was a big part of this, less about me getting credit and like more about, I am in this not to repeat the same lesson. It's that old line of, do you have 20 years of experience or 1 year of experience 20 times? I am more on the former, like, let's build out the next thing. And, we've worked with 600 plus clients, dude, in the last 23 years, 600, which means I've also been fired 600 times. And as a guy who did not love rejection, I got in a weird business, because how many frogs do you have to kiss to bring in, these are not just coaching clients. These were like mini transformational moments where we would spend 2 to 3 years with an account, and, and it would just run, they just run their course. Some last 7, 8 years. Some of them last 3 months. Sometimes there's that chemistry and that magic, and then sometimes just not. So for me, we never signed up anybody to a long-term contract. I've been saying the same thing for 20 some years, which is like, if it's not good, don't pay us. They're like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, the contract is such bullshit. It really is. Like, this is not, I've been in big corporate gigs where, I've had a client pay us $250,000 a month. I've had them sign the agreement, and then I've literally had them the next day say, "We're not doing this anymore," for no reason. Like, it, to me, when I say you're only as good as your last meeting, I guess it's a scarcity mindset of not very like positive way to think about things. But on the other side, it's acknowledging that you've got to earn your keep with the client, and you've got to constantly be delivering value, not in a way that it's like drinking from a fire hose. Like, sometimes your value is just your presence. Sometimes your value is, a connection you make for the client. Sometimes your value is, yes, your thing, your framework, your way. But I find it often is not that.
What's the difference between the clients that you work with for, let's say, 3 months and those that you work with for 3 years? If you kind of do a quick analysis, and maybe this is something you've likely done, but are there some kind of criteria, characteristics, any lessons that you maybe learned from the clients that maybe tend to not stick around as long compared to those that you work with for many years?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, we've been ranged from small to mid-sized to stand up, more mature, even family businesses, to even multi-billion-dollar companies. And, I've again been very fortunate that we've been at the C-suite in some of those companies to just see like a real machine, a real matrix happen. In the environments that we last longer, I would say a couple things are true. Number one, regardless of the person's title, like, we've worked with a CEO of a $10 billion company and they were not running the company. So it's got to be someone who's calling the shots. And even though the title may sometimes give you the signal of that, I would just say sometimes it's not true. I would say that leads to the second piece, which is like, what's the actual insecurity we're dealing with the CEO? So I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, but if the insecurity is, I'm not enough and I need to be seen, and then therefore wouldn't be excited about sharing my new advisor or my new consulting company that I'm going to have come in and run the play, then I would say that this competitiveness about where the ideas originate from is a huge red flag for me, including them asking us to say, well, what did you come up with? What did you do? And it's like, I'm not here to be your monkey. I don't dance. I don't dance great, actually, but I dance occasionally. What I'm here to do is produce magic between us. And that does not mean I don't have good ideas. In fact, I would argue some of the value that we bring is emergent ideas that none of us have thought of. But that is because it emerges between us, not because I'm coming in as your sage on the stage or your guru or some other authority figure, because I've been doing this for a long time. I have a lot more humility to know there is no way. There are multiple ways. It is all situational. And I trust at the end of the day that our clients will figure it out for themselves with a lot of good guidance around them. And so the last thing that sort of seems to me to be a really mark for us in our business at Shift is a CEO who, has all of the things, the growth mindset, they embrace change, they're progressive. But it's this one thing that seems to really stick with us, which is that they get their people are their most important asset. But they understand that the job is this responsibility of other human beings. And so they don't look at it as like the means to an end. That is the privilege. The privilege is in this position of serving, and not overdoing the servant leadership thing, but like not also overdoing the power over people. That makes sense. Like, yeah.
I think a lot of people can resonate with that, Joe, and probably several aspects of it. How do you identify that? What have you found is the best way? Because you're talking about, one, being able to figure out who's actually calling the shots, where in some cases it's not apparent, or it might take potentially several meetings, or like you just don't know that just based on a title, as you said. The insecurity is obviously something that is deeper. I don't know if you're finding that people are just sharing publicly, like, here's what I'm insecure about. So how do you identify that? And then in terms of finding leaders where they recognize that people are their most valuable asset, how do you identify that? What's coming up? So I'd love if you kind of take us a little bit behind the scenes when you're having meetings or you're deciding who to work with or who not to work with. How do you try and kind of suss out or identify those three different kind of criteria or parts?
Another great question without a specific answer, but I'll do my best to come up and coddle something together.
I have a feeling we'll probably have a few of these throughout our conversation today, so it's all good.
I would say, so one of my mentors, to sort of shamelessly name drop, is Richard Saul-Wurman, founder of TED. He's written 88 books. The guy's 88 years old, written 91 books, 88 years old. And he has this line, he talks about tango, like who's leading who, like it's about the conversation. And I think it's evident when you enter into a conversation. Like right now, you're putting me on the hot seat, you're asking me the questions, and that's cool. That's the interview, that's the format. Right. If we were grabbing coffee, right, there could be some back and forth on this volley, but eventually, dude, I want to get to know you. Like, and like, are you willing to participate in the sharing of conversation? Are you willing to dance with me? Are you willing, if I say something about, and I've got an ace up my sleeve because my story is not traditional. I'm not pedigreed. I mean, it's a miracle I'm here. And so if I share bits and pieces of me, not the whole thing, but just bits and pieces, and they respond in kind, I think what you have is a good faith actor. I think you have somebody who's willing to maybe enter into that ring of conversation with you. I think the other piece that you'll see too is it's like the way that they treat people, and there's been, obviously everybody's got their anecdotes around this, but again, it's like there was a scene from Yellowstone, to be a little cheesy here for a minute. Kevin Costner was talking about, I don't work on the land, I work with it. And I think you'll start to hear that from people who have a relationship with power such that they're not overdoing it. In fact, they look at it like this. And so everything from like how you work with your assistant, so to speak, or your team, are you working with them or are you talking to them? Like, I think there's all these little things that you'll pick up on just in terms of language, the energy of the conversation, the way in which the person positions and presents themselves. And then I think, look, when I think about culture is your most important asset, the subtle piece in that is that it's people who have hope. they be hope. They believe that better is possible. They believe that people haven't reached potential yet. They believe there's more, there's more juice in the can, so to speak. And so, I loved every once in a while when I'm talking to an executive who's been there, done that, who doesn't have any time for me, who's like, they've done all the things and they're going to tell me about all their things. And I think those things are great. And I hear them and I receive them and I go, great. How can I think about those things? But then I go, so how are things going? Great. Couldn't be better. Okay. What are you trying to work on? It's all, you'd be surprised. We're really working on it. It's going great. I'm like, okay. So is there anything that you think could be like better or different? No, I mean, I think we're getting what we can get. And that is hopeless. And in fact, not only is it hopeless, I'd argue, why do we need you? Like, if it's doing its thing, what are you doing? Why do we need a babysitter? We don't need someone to mind the shop. We need somebody to create value in a barrier-free environment so that people can, build a healthy and a high-performing environment. And it's like, that job is never done. So I'm, these are not like booby traps, but I definitely think, just as we're casually having this conversation about like, what's the EQ, if you will, of the leader? How do they have a their self-awareness is a big piece. You're looking for the narcissism that sort of shows up in those roles. We all have narcissism. It's not a bad word all the time. And it can be when you're not able to see yourself from a distance in relationship with other people. That there's a quote, they say the music is in the space between the notes. I think culture, and I think really leadership and character, it's like in the space between people. It's like, how does that show up? How do you show up? And I think you pick up on it. I mean, I think we all have a pretty reasonable scent for the sociopaths or the creeps, and then the folks in the middle who are like earnestly just trying to run the play, man. They're trying to figure out like what's good for the organization, what's good for, oh, this is a good one. Whatever is good for them is good for their team, is good for the organization, and it's good for their clients, and it's good for the rest of the world. Like, they're looking for that triple to 4 or 5 time win all the way through. That's a marker for me. It's like somebody who can think expansively. They can widen their circle of concern. Sometimes that really shows up in that way.
Joe, most consulting founders will have an experience where they'll be talking to somebody that inside they know, like, that gut feeling is like, yeah, this is probably not going to work out. I don't really get a good vibe, but the deal is so lucrative. There's such a big opportunity. The dollar signs or euro or whatever currency they're working in is kind of, it's flashing, and they take the business on. I'm wondering for you, if you can take us back to maybe a period when that happened, if it did. And I'm wondering, when did you kind of realize, when did the light bulb go off? When did you draw the line in the sand, telling yourself and telling your team, like, we're not going to do this again? What did it look like?
Yeah. So look, I started the company with the idea that I wasn't going to be like the Joe show, and no offense to anyone who is, it wasn't my path. I wanted to make the room smarter, not be the smartest in the room. And so we've had that model. It's not really, I'm not the smartest person that does what we do. I have my gifts, my lanes. So we built the company up for the first 5 to 6 to 7 years. We got to 2008, which is about 7 years in. And for a myriad of reasons, we'll just cut to the chase. I lost, all my money. First year of marriage, $1 million in debt. Welcome. Here we are. So, on a side, told my lady, like, this is going to probably take a couple years. Sorry. May not be a good time for you to stick around. This is like a perfect off ramp if you want it. She, of course, not of course, but she didn't flinch, which was like a nice thing to have at the point. And as we entered into 2009, we went from, like, I don't know, 30 some people down to 10. And 2009, 10 and 11, I'm younger, trying to figure out how I'm going to pay all this debt back and how we're going to basically run $1 million+ business with a $20,000 a month debt load. And so, all just to share that the stakes were high. It felt irreversible, and it felt like I had to go hunt, like hardcore hunt, pursue. Economy is terrible. Who the hell are we? I don't have a book yet. I mean, it just was what it was. We had 2 quick relationships, 2 quick clients that I'll just mention. One guy is actually, and I won't mention his name, but he's in, I think he's serving about 10 years right now for fraud. And so I got myself mixed up with this guy. He was a very influential figure in the tech community. And, when I met him, he was like, I was like, oh, getting to know him a little bit. He was like, I don't eat meat because I believe in karma. I was like, I know a lot of vegans. I've never heard someone say that. Like, and that was okay. But like, then I just started adding up these stories. He was an early investor in a bunch of big companies. This is again 2009 and 10. And so his perch was way different than my perch. We hired a bunch of people. We did a little recruiting at that period of time. I mean, he's probably into me for 100 grand, 90 days of work. And then he fires the whole team, and then he doesn't respond to an email. And then he gets his partner involved, who's, you know, building foundations in another country. And like, so here I am, broke, no money. And I've got a guy being heavy a little bit with me. And it was like 2 or 3 years of like him like making threats. And look, I grew up in Baltimore City. So like, I mean, I was like, dude, you gotta ease up on the real threats. The fake threats, have at it with your attorney, but the real threats would be a bad idea. You know, me just being my typical chippy self. I'm not suggesting that this is ever a good outcome. I'm just sharing with you how the story went.
Yeah.
And then we got another client, dude, at the same period of time who was doing solar panels, 2009, way before what Solar City has become. You know, and this guy was not a guy, you know, I think when you're young, you're trying to figure out the pattern. Like, who has it, who doesn't? Who's full of shit? Who's not? Who are the people that were right time, right place, but don't have a fucking clue what they're doing? And who are the people that you can just, they've got a touch. Okay. And I sometimes get wooed by the touch because I look at their last couple moments, and I sometimes look at the past to predict the future potential state. Because if they solved it then, why couldn't they solve it again? Well, that's not a good way to always think about things. And so, you know, to make a long story short, one guy owes us over 100. The solar company owes us well over 60, 70,000 bucks. And like, dude, those were hard moments. Like, I have a memory of all the times that I've been, let's just say, not feeling like got the right end of the stick. And, you know, with the guy who ended up, you know, getting caught for fraud, I mean, this took 10 years for them to catch him, or maybe not, maybe like 8. And, you know, look, you live, you learn, you're going to be just fine. You know, I would say get used to, no matter how intimate you are with the CEO, if it's not their money, it's not their decision. So if it's a publicly traded or a big company or they're the hired gun, just remind yourself that everyone's doing the best they can. Everyone at the end of the day is likely to make a decision what's best for them. And that is okay. You know, that sometimes not everything's going to come out fair in the way that you want it to. And on the other side is like, as you're thinking about, you know, folks that have remember 90% of venture and seed companies do not work. And no matter how big and cool they seem, they're likely not to work. And so you just have to, I think, calibrate that into your thinking of like, where are you going to spend your time, energy, and resource? And look, I'm 23 years in, and I'm still probably in a few relationships that we shouldn't be because we have to.
Right. All right. So let's fast forward. I mean, you shared right now a period of struggle. Today things are different. And you talked earlier, Joe, about the book, that the book opened doors. Was there anything else that you were doing, I mean, even before the book, that you feel really played a big role, had a big impact on, you know, building a pipeline, generating leads, getting you kind of, you know, into the room for appointments and meetings, business development, marketing wise?
So this is, I don't think anything is going to necessarily translate, but, you know, I basically started Shift at the same time I started a foundation in Baltimore City. And so out of the gate, these were two things running in parallel. One was trying to work on a social enterprise before that was even a concept. And then Shift was over here. So I was walking the halls with do-gooders, my target audience. I was on boards. I did a lot of not-for-profit work. I mean, you know, this will be the first time I've ever uttered this, but it is written. So, you know, I donated over $1 million and invested over $1 million way before I had it. And, you know, some of it is my survivor's guilt. Some of it is I just wanted to play a part. Some of it is I am, you know, I'll figure it out myself. Some of it was I thought it was my chance to help in the same way I was helped. So all of those things are true. And then, you know, and then I really started thinking about like, you know, what are the other ways that we can grow the business? We had a recruiting practice for a period of time, but that was episodic revenue, not recurring revenue. Like, you know, again, everyone who's got a non-recurring revenue model, I would just urge you to run into that as fast as you can. Not for everybody, of course, but I do think there is some stability that it gives you a chance to breathe when you get to the first of every month. And you've got, there was a period of time where we had, over $400,000 a month recurring revenue. Like you walk in with, $100,000 net profit every month.
Mm-hmm.
That is a big deep breath you take, and so up to the time that I wrote my first book, we probably did, I don't know, 15 plus million over, 6, 7, 10 years, whatever it was. Not a lot. It was up and down just based on projects, based on big gigs, based on not big gigs. And then post my first book to my second book to today, that's almost over 50, because like all of a sudden people think you have something to say. All of a sudden they want to hear you speak, or, and I can give you a couple other things that we did, is that we created a membership group around the business called Ship Society. Again, sort of a do-gooder thing, but like, was a spot for executives to go once we got done working with them. Mm-hmm. So maybe it wasn't their whole company, but we were working with them in like a YPO kind of cool group. I got involved in a venture company, same sort of thing. I wanted to get to earlier companies. And again, it had kind of a mission-based feel. So everything we've done has got a little bit of like go save the world thing going on. But from
it sounds like proximity. Sorry to interrupt, Joe, but it sounds like proximity is key for you, like getting close to the right people, whether it's being part of foundations or boards, whether it's being involved in, some kind of an investment vehicle, or as you said, kind of creating a membership for, you work with your clients. Then when they transition out, you're no longer working, you're still keeping people close. Is that very intentional? Like, do you kind of feel that is core to how you go about building business, is proximity?
Yeah, I would say it's relationships, without sounding like a dreary old person talking about how relationships are everything. I think it's like, how do you scale authentic connections? So I'm part of, you and I are part of Hampton, and I'm part of 4 or 5 other groups. And so, it's a way for me to have people that I know that I can connect, people that I know that might need, I've taken, a crew of people to Tel Aviv to check out the tech scene. I've gone to Branson's Island a couple of times. Like, we've done things that are extreme. We've, from a business development standpoint, I would say that, I have tried to do there's a book called Professional Service, Marketing for Professional Service Companies. It's a really old academic book, but it sort of unpacks, like, before inbound marketing was cool, you can talk about your research, you can report on things. I had a podcast for a minute, a couple of them, and then you can put stuff in a book, you can write white papers, you can write blogs. Like, those are all that way to contain content where you're the flower, not the bee, where you're the people, they're coming towards you because you've got something to say. But I've also done the bee thing, fairly well. And it's exhausting, because you're sort of always on. But the thing for me has always been like, I'm just going to do things that fill my cup up, and I'll run into the right people.
What about today? So early days, right? You're in these different kind of groups, whether it's foundations, boards, you then get the book out. Is there anything you're doing today that stands out to you as being quite different, that is working very well, that you have not yet mentioned?
I mean, speaking is probably, again, it seems like an obvious thing for some.
Sure.
For me, it becomes like a weird thing that I can't explain to you, which is, if I have the opportunity to be heard, I'm not a great speaker, but I'm an amazing trainer and facilitator. And so what I have become very gifted at is, if I've got a room of 10 or 100 or 1,000, give me like an hour and a half to 2 hours. And generally speaking, you'll leave that with an amazing amount, I think, of understanding of who we are, what we stand for. And that tends to be by far the best taco to buy from our enchilada. So, I used to not want to do, once you write a book, they want you to, whoever they are, want you to do 2 years of basically talking about the book. And I just didn't do that for either book. However, I do think there is something about, if you have something to say, you have a voice and a message, for you to be willing to, like, literally and figuratively scream it from the mountaintop. And so I think that sometimes gets overlooked, in the sense that, like, oh, we'll just go find a speaking event or have people talk to you. And it's like, yeah, but think about that as like like a church moment.
Mhm.
I don't go, but like when I did, like, the idea that it's a spiritual gathering of human beings that are maybe wanting to be receptive to a new point of view, or maybe skeptical of a new point of view. It's like, what role can you play in gathering this group of human hearts and souls to start to rethink the way they do things and not accept your recipe, lock, stock, and barrel, but they're willing to maybe back to tango, back to back to co-create, all the new agey fuzzy words. But it's like, but that becomes, I think, something that people take with them and they hold it. And I think as a consultant, whether you're a one-off shop or not, I would say almost never say no to a speaking opportunity, because I say no often, but say yes and invest in it, not just to tell your old stories over and over and over again. Like really get to know the company before you go in, and that'll all show. It really will.
You talked about the recurring model and how you'd encourage more people to have their engagements structured where there is a recurring revenue component to it, if not fully focused on that. Is there anything inside of that that you've done, or like if somebody's thinking to themselves, I'm providing more custom consulting services, whether it's hourly, project based, whatever. Any suggestions, any guidance, anything that you can offer in terms of how maybe you've done that in your own business, or maybe even just some principles that you think are key to recurring revenue?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, you're familiar with Corporate Executive Board. This was a think tank back in the day that became $1 billion behemoth bought by Gartner. Why? Because of their membership. So they would produce these papers. They didn't do, from my understanding, strict consulting, but they might have done some advising. And then they decided to put this out like Gartner or Forrester or some of these other bigger shops. And so again, that was my 2014 thinking, which is I was like, all right, we're going to put a group around the consulting business as a lab. We're going to use it to test and try things. We're going to use it to grow ourselves and our clients, and then we'll have places to put them. So whether it's this membership model, whether they buy our books. So I had like, books and, media was a sort of a thought process for Shift. I thought about the idea of ventures. So Shift Ventures, is and was a thing back then. Because what I found was I have been climbing the ladder of understanding. So I started out as like, I can help your team sell more. I can help your leaders lead better. I can help your structure, your systems, your strategy. And then it was like at the CE level, well, let's raise some money. Let's go public. Let's buy companies. Let's succeed from a executive level. Like these are just things we learned along the way. Well, having an understanding of what the capital markets are all about. How do you leverage, equity and different forms of resources as a capital allocator? Like that ultimately for me was something I wanted to learn. So all these things were learning: Shift Recruiting, Shift Media, Shift Ventures. And I would say that the thing for me now that I would have people think about, like we resold diagnostics, we resold other people's platforms, we became a VAR, a value-added reseller, to a couple other places. And I would say, like, when you look at, there's ecosystems within Salesforce or Microsoft or I don't know, grab your big favorite software company. Most of them sell through some type of VAR network. And that could be a tremendous leverage point in terms of more leads. And I would say that that's more on the tech side. But for me today, like if I had to do it all over again, I would have absolutely either partnered with a tech company earlier on, became a VAR, or what we're doing today, which is go buy something and go build something and see if you can break the time value barrier. See if you can. There's a quote from Churchill. He said, "We shape buildings and then they shape us." And like the most humbling thing in the last 30 months of building a tech platform has been to realize that like it is a precise game, not this game of personality.
Yeah.
So I'm like getting my white belt on that.
Yeah. I mean, you're so just to summarize for everyone that's joining us. I mean, you're saying, of course, you can go out and build a new tool, software, have an engagement and a way that you provide your services using recurring revenue, but you can also find other products or services that you can essentially offer to your clients, and software could be a one example of that. So it doesn't have to always be something that you create yourself. It could be what other resources are out there that your ideal clients would find valuable, tools, whatever it might be. Offer that, and through that you might be able to create a significant kind of recurring revenue in your business.
Yeah, I mean, look, you didn't ask, and I'm not sure it's okay to do this, but like, it's one of the reasons that this platform Latch, Shift is using Latch, this platform that is this like way to get your team on the same page without scheduling more meetings. And I'm looking at Shift as the client number one. So we're using it with our clients. We've got thousands of users on it. We've been live for about 6 months, and we're getting a chance to sort of see how we take this to market as Shift. But phase 2 of this thing has been like, well, look, I've sat on all these different sides of the table. I'm like, maybe we should build out an indirect network of consultants who really are amazing at what they do, and they'll sell this. And so we're testing that out with a couple of folks now that, I just know a lot of folks in the industry who are amazing. But look, maybe it's just where I am in life, but I know a lot of people in their 60s and 70s who are amazing, and they're aging out not because of them, but because the world is moving so fast.
Yeah.
And the way commerce happens, like when I say, hey, have you heard of Mr. Beast? It's not because I've got kids that are 11 and 13. It's because there's a YouTube economy, like there was an Amazon economy, like there was an internet economy before the brick and mortar economy. And there are a lot of people that don't know that. And it's like, I think, you'd be surprised at what people are doing to build their own platforms, and then to leverage that platform and monetize it in a way that, is just very different. So I think that's the game. The puck has moved greatly, in my opinion.
Joe, as a consulting founder, you've had a team of 40 plus, right, at times. What are you spending your time on right now that when you look back, the benefit of hindsight, you think to yourself, I should have been spending more time on this earlier?
Building a platform. And I'll say that in 2 ways. So where I gave you the whole, I want to make the room smarter and not be the smartest in the room, I have not done a great job of building my individual Joe, not Shift platform. And less about, I've always had this like inner critic of not wanting to have a big ego and not putting myself out there, and it's not about me and all the things.
When you say platform, you're referring to kind of like building your personal brand?
Yeah, I mean it in 2 ways. So personal brand is one piece, like, YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, like these are things that from a business to business perspective, I had always said, I'm going to be late. I'm already late. I don't want to jump in. And it's like, no, just go. And on the second piece is a literal platform or a literal product where, you don't allow your past to dictate whether you can jump in. I mean, like the no code, low code, what's going on with AI right now. Like if you're listening to this, the invitation is, the door is wide open. We, maybe 10 years ago, we'd all have to be different kinds of personalities to build things. But I would say today, it feels like we are just in the second inning of this nine inning game. And we're, it's about to get real fun and real fast soon.
What's one thing that you're still spending time on that you feel like you really shouldn't be? It's not the highest value work. It doesn't create the most value for you or for the company, but you still find yourself kind of, doing it or in the weeds.
I would say that, I am still in some client work, and some of that client work is not programmatic. It's not based on our work. It's based on someone needs to talk. And I know that I have a very different presence than some of our team, and it's not always linear. It's not always clean, and then sometimes it's like, well, did I invest that in the right person or the right thing? Like, I just think that that's the struggle we all have. Like, it's what are the temptations to resist, the opportunities to seize as it relates to where to put your time, energy, and focus. And so, I would say client work has always been a little bit of my thing, which is like, I am very good at it. And at the same time, my role should be in building, and thinking about, for me and where I am and my vision is I want to build real enterprise value. Like I actually, of all the things I've done in business, I have not done everything, but the one thing is definitely missing from my resume is not buying, building, or starting. It's finishing and selling. So I think to round my own understanding at like a visceral level, I want to know what it's like to raise money. So I did it. I've raised a lot of money. Like in our venture firm, I helped not me, but I was around for 20 million bucks. Like, it's not a small amount of money, but it wasn't me. Like, I helped. I was in the conversations, but I'm not the one with like the proverbial gun to your head. I wanted to know what that was like. And so I think, like, for me, learning by doing is always my default. And I think as creators, as consultants, as people running shops that are helping people do the work, I really do think it's important that your words, your actions are very, very close together, and that your felt and lived experience matches the things you're teaching.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you have, we're going to wrap up here in a moment, but I'm wondering, is there any model or framework or how you approach decisions as it relates to how you spend your time when you decide to hire another team member versus, looking at the difference between what that salary or kind of quote unquote expense is going to be versus the potential return? Any kind of models or frameworks that you always keep kind of up front and center and use to make decisions inside a business?
Yeah, so this is not great advice I'm about to give you, which is, like, I think every situation is totally different. And I think a lot of the pressure to hire people inside of a small consulting company, what I would say is the world's moved to contractor, 1099, partnerships, JVs. Like, I have a team of W-2s, hefty, heavy. That is not variable a lot. Some of our team is variable, but like not really. And that is pressure to make sure that we hit our numbers and we're doing what we do. I think if I were thinking about this fresh from today, I would think about making sure that the way I get business is the way that I do the business on the back end. And so if this is episodic, then I would have an episodic model on the back end. If this is recurring, then I would have a recurring model on this end. I think another thing that I would think about is, like, how do I spend my time? Don't read Flawless Consulting by Peter Block. Don't worry about The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. I would say get 10 years into the future and imagine that every one of your clients is going to fire you. How's that going to feel? When you look back after helping all these other people solve their problems, what was the problem you solved for you? So all the martyrs, all the selfless givers, I'm a people pleaser. I get it. Like, I would just want to be helpful. I want to be of service. Like, and I really mean it. I do. But I also know that, like, I can get sucked up into other people's drama and their stuff. And that's the gig. That's the job. Like, I should go do that. Right. And so, like, I think as you're thinking about adding people, just remember that, nothing lasts forever. Forever is a long time, as my dad used to say. He said that to me. I was walking down the aisle to marry my lady. He's like, forever is a long time and nothing lasts forever. I'm like, that of all the time. Like, he never misses. I'm like, that's a miss, just so we're clear.
Yeah.
And on the consulting side, I think, like, as you're thinking about bringing people in, I think it's, look, it's a tight job market. If you're lucky enough to get somebody that you really like, find a way to align the incentive structure such that, they're, and look, you got to remember, you're hiring them because likely they can't bring in business. So everybody who says they're going to sell and do, just immediately handicap that, because if they could do it, they would have. It just is it. Doesn't mean they aren't amazing at delivering it. But if they could bring in the business, they would have already done it. So it doesn't mean they can't learn skills and play a role in your system to bring in business. But I would be remiss if I didn't think about the probably 100+ people I've hired in 23 years and how many of them had the right pedigree, the right background, the right experience. They had done it for other people. I mean, heck, maybe we're the problem. But even when we've hired those people from mid-tier shops, they've had a hard time because, to your point, I sell at a very intimate, connected level. And that's the way I do it. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just the way we do it. So I think that's hard for people to step into and then, like, recreate that out of nowhere.
Joe, I want to thank you for coming on and just sharing a little bit of your story with us here today. It's important that people can learn more about your company, your work, everything that you guys have going on. So where's the best place we should send them? What's that one URL that we should make sure to direct people to?
shiftthework.com.
All right. We will have that linked up in the show notes. Joe, again, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, man. Thank you.